there were so much expectations on the capitalist model, you know. And Marx also said that when the railway network was being built in India, so he expected that all these pre-existing social relations should get weakened, but nothing of that kind happened. Capitalism has penetrated society, spanned the globe, homogenizing social life. It did it. And in global, today we see that, that's the reality, that it has actually spanned the entire globe. But but instead of something like universalizing popular politics, capitalist expansion weakening the considerably destroying working class politics, particularly the mother countries, right? Because the entire formulation of that there would be something like a manufacturing, mass manufacturing industries, etc. would come, and then the people working would actually identify with each other and classes at home. It's the first time that in capitalist phase that a pure classes would emerge, proletariat, bourgeoisie, and would take the entire thing to something like a revolutionary transformation, which did not happen. The advance of international markets and technological change are eviscerating the mass production industry, diminishing the working class numbers. Everywhere you can find the manufacturing industry, the working class is actually getting diminished. And much of it has to do with the technology, management, innovations, etc. Instead of wiping out our ancient prejudices, globalizing capital is promoting a rising tide of factious racial, ethnic, religious, and gender conflict. It is contributing to identity politics not only along ancient prejudices, but creating new prejudices and opinions. So this basically is giving way to the identity politics, and the different way of understanding this neoliberalism, how it's actually promoting identity politics is neoliberalism is basically discretizing everything in its way. Okay, so something like it discretizes society into discrete individuals. The time span into discrete time span. Here and now is the approach of neoliberalism. And in the process, actually, it creates a huge insecurity. So this is what happens. In insecure being, the discrete individual actually takes shelter under the primordial kinds of identity, whatever that is available to them, that actually tend to take shelter. So it's not an Indian phenomenon; it's a global. That everywhere these kinds of identities have really researched, and the identity politics has gained grounds. There's upsurge of identity politics all over the globe. 3 decades ago, such proclamations from the past would have seemed exotic. Now they seem unremarkable. No people, no place is immune from the tide of identity politics. Intellectual fashion refracts these real world developments and perhaps contributes to them. And Samuel Huntington naturally. Naturalness of identity politics. What is wrong with identity politics? Many people actually argue that what is wrong with identity politics? The caste is the reality, etc., and the people will be grouping around caste, etc. So nothing wrong about identity politics. Identity as such, you know, appear very natural, biological, and all kinds of thing. Identity per se, there is a corollary of identity. If you form a collective identity, there is the other gate generated. So it's a sort of mirror image of that. The leftist abhor, I too abhor identity politics because it negates class. Right from the beginning, sort of these kinds of identity actually clash with the class formation, class consciousness, etc. But even the 20th century, which is termed as a century of revolutions, so Hobsbawm, who is actually the chronicler of this 20th century, he also observed that all these revolutions, all these political movements, etc., were in fact around the identities. Some kind of identities was the base of that. So it's a question, who is to be blamed? Whose identity is this actually? Identity politics can be potentially liberating and even equalizing development for the subordinate groups, more so in political culture dominated by identity politics. Of course, it needs to be delicately balanced as tactic which coheres with strategic intent of universal emancipation. Because this is something identity, when people group around identity, that is the concrete. And the movement could be built around that. But there should be something like, as I said in the morning, that in course of our this thing, we actually lose sight of our goals. What is the ultimate goal? So this is what happens. The critique is directed at the subordinate groups who assert practice identities. should be directed against the ruling classes to set the tone of politics and fan the identities among the people. And if you minutely look at this, this is more of a fan by ruling classes ever than otherwise. Which identities? Now, the identity politics can be patterned as tactical dimension if the identities are fairly stable, such as race, gender, ethnicity, etc. They cannot be conceived on the basis of identity which tend to split. Caste is one such identity, unlike any other, that seeks hierarchy and splits like amoeba. Caste only knows splitting, that actually it does not bring people together. The politics on the basis of caste identity has decimated Dalit into inverted commas and reduced it to internecine squabbles in the form of Mala Madhega syndrome. So now if we see today, everything is actually Dalit no more exists, and everywhere in every state there is something like a subcaste kind of identities that have researched in Dalit politics too. This is my kind of model, entire thing I did just now. So something like how the changes have taken place in terms of something like the black identity formation as we traversed. So initially, traditional Africa, where from the people were brought to US, so that was something like an African tribal. It was no more homogeneous. There were a lot many tribal identities that played, but they came together. That was something like a tribal identity, was a cohesive thing. And it led to social disruption, slave trade. Then it comes to something like slavery. In the phase of slavery, the identity transformed into slave, something like they all identified as a slave. It was sort of a cohesive kind of identity in sense. Then it led to emancipation. The struggle took place, so many things that we discussed a little bit in the morning. People went to rural life and started their kind of agriculture activities and so several other activities. The identity was perhaps the Negro. We can say the quote unquote Negro. And then came the migration to urban life, etc. And the identity transformation took place in black and African American. That's what they call themselves now. And urban crisis actually, urban this thing transformed into the crisis and gave the neoliberal America. So now it's something like comes little black bourgeoisie and things like that. And it anyway, socially speaking, there are a lot of current literature, etc., which speaks of the severe crisis, because the entire movement and all those kinds of things, as Professor Kevin also was speaking in the morning. So this actually leading to severe crisis, because there are no more kind of concern to the people who have been left behind. Okay, so the entire thing actually we should never be forgetting that part, that when we talk of Dalit or talk of blacks, there is majority of blacks or majority of Dalit that we tend to talk about. Oh, this is Dalit. In Dalit case, similar kind of the same kind of model I use in social cohesion, social disruption. The pre-colonial India, they are all untouchables. They were all divided, but sort of it was a stable kind of thing, and stability remained for millenniums. So there was no question about it. It was an internalized kind of identity as untouchables. Then came a colonization. Colonization, all said and done, there was lots of things that British colonizers did here. Because once 1857 happened, they were terrorized by this thing, and they undertook upon themselves that what strategies to follow in order to control this thing. And you cannot control what you cannot measure. With that kind of dictum, they actually undertook a huge measurement. They sent a battery of anthropologists, sociologists, and so on, and instituted census, etc. And everything they started measuring the length of the nose, length of the ear, and all kinds of things. And in census, the caste census, the kind of which actually caste used to be localized identity became something like a pan-Indian identities. So this happened. So the identities was depressed classes, wrong people, that kind of consciousness came in, and it formed Dalit. In this phase only, the Dalit movement also got articulated. It gave phase the post-colonial phase. We can jump onto, there are a lot of, in micro terms, there could be a lot of things. Post-colonial, then of course the scheduled caste kind of image stuck. The conversion took place, Dalit and Buddhist, all kinds of things. This is the majority thing. One kind of thing, all these Dalits we talk about is not homogeneous. Already we talked about Mala Madhega syndrome, etc. So the rest of the people a majority caste in every region actually became sort of Dalit. They identified with the Ambedkar movement and they called themselves Dalit, but rest of the people remained untouchable. So that spectrum remains from untouchable, that where actually they remained in the pre-colonial days, to the Dalit, something like a transformative identity. Then the post-independent development phase came in, that so many things happened, and people normally, it is not adequately noted that the kind of change that was brought in this country has not really had a parallel over 3 millennia. So that kind of process, and then comes a neoliberal India, becomes a neoliberal India from mid-80s onward. And now you have a Dalit bourgeoisie, Dalit and the subcaste identities like so this is something like a two ways it is happening, like a Dalit bourgeoisie kind of phenomenon happening, and the identities of subcaste identities. So Dalit bourgeoisie and all these things, again people say that what is wrong with the Dalit bourgeoisie? Okay, why not actually have an emancipatory thing? That nothing is wrong. The wrong is that they're actually falsifying everything. Earlier times also, the proposition is that after 90s only there has been a fillip to Dalit businesses, etc., and people have really escaped their caste bondage from the villages. These kind of things were published in the EPW, you know, that UPenn and those papers, etc. What is wrong is, firstly, it is a false thing, because the rich individuals and filthy rich individuals belonging to Dalit caste existed even in Ambedkar's time. Okay, and that is fairly documented. They were existing such kind of individuals, zamindars, and some way, one does not know how they actually earned their wealth, etc., but such kind of things remained. And Dalit capitalism, somebody actually becomes Dalit capitalist, nothing is wrong, nobody prohibits it, but if it is given a color of something like an emancipatory paradigm, then there is all the problem. None other than Ambedkar had said that the enemy of Dalits is the capitalism and Brahminism. Now, you cannot get over to the enemy camp and say that you are emancipated. It stands to basic logic also. From the whatever that has happened, you know, this bunch of people actually propagating Dalit capitalism, so there was not much of a force. Even the millions of people have been struggling for years, and the state does not take a note. This state, with the response to this half a dozen kind of fellows, they are offering them all kinds of things. All entire capitalists, big bourgeoisie of this land actually visit them and actually propagate them. So for a common masses, it is evident, or it's very clear who the enemy is and who the friend is. So these are the kind of identity formations that have been there, and I think I stop here.